As we usually do, we'd like to begin with a story. And this is a story from Big Island, from the Kona side. We haven't told the story from Kona side yet. Ikawa kahiko, mamualoa o kapenakuki. Once upon a time, long before Captain Cook, there was a young man lived in the forest of Hualalai volcano, which is over on that side. And in those days, as a matter of fact, through most of Hawaiian history on these islands, the Hawaiians typically lived on the coastline. They normally didn't live. There were a few people who went to the uplands and went into the forest, but rarely was anybody living there. But Hiku was a young boy who lived there with his mother and his grandfather. He was the son, actually, of a chief, and a chief from Kauai. Name was Chief Walu, and like what was typical of what would happen in those days, and also a common theme in many kinds of stories, the chief had left some tokens of the birth, so that when the young boy grew up and became a man, he would be able to prove his lineage. Because Hawaii had throughout much of its history, had a nobility class, aristocracy, you could call it, and a commoners. And if a noble had an affair and produced a child, even with a commoner, the child was noble automatically. Not very high rank, but still could claim noble blood. When Hugo was a young boy, he learned all kinds of things about the forest, but while he was still a young boy, one day he heard this sound on the wind. And it wasn't anything that he remembered hearing before. And he said, "Mom." He didn't really say mom, but they have their kind of equivalent. "Mom," make this a casual story. He said, "What is that?" He said, "It's not the singing of birds. It's not the shaking of leaves. It's not the rolling of distant thunder." And she says, she said, "That is the shouting of people who are praising someone who is either surfing or diving down on the coast." He said, "Well," he said, "I'd like to go down on the coast and dive and surf and have people praise me too." And she says, Sure, but you're not old enough. You have to wait. It's going to take time." So, okay. He was, mom. She was mom. She was in charge. But he thought to himself, someday he's going to go down. He's going to surf. He's going to dive. And he's going to hear that praise for him. So, his mom said, as he got older and he kept asking, and she said, "No, enough for you with the sports of the forest for now. Okay? Here you can climb the great trees, you can shoot arrows, you can wrestle with the wind and the rain. You learn that first." So he grew older and older, and finally the day came when he stood before his mother and he said, "Mother, I am a man, and I'm going down to surf and to dive." She said, "Yes, it's time." So she went and got the bundle that his father had left him, and she said, "These are your tokens of your birth, of your high birth, and take these with you, but when you get down there, hide them someplace, because you don't show them to just anyone, and you show them to a chief when it's absolutely necessary." So he promised that that's what he would do. This is a common theme, as I mentioned, in Hawaii stories. We find a lot of them where this was to show that the hero almost always had to be noble birth in some way or another. Okay, so there were always this little thing in there it's almost like the Greek legends where there had to be a god who produced the hero, and so he could claim his lineage to the gods. Very similar. So he came out of the woods and onto a narrow plain, and there he saw this big beach, and there he saw people on the beach like they were sitting and laughing and talking, and then on the water he saw the most amazing thing, because he'd never been to the ocean before. So on the water he sees these people either lying on the waves or standing on the waves, as they come into shore. And for just a few short moments, he thought they were gods to be able to do that. And then finally he saw some come in and land on the shore and pick up their boards and go laughing to the other people who were waiting. And so, okay, he's starting to understand it a little bit more. So as he walked into the sand, some of the young people there, they looked up and they saw him. What they saw was a young man with a very strong physique, a very proud bearing, a very handsome face, and because his mother had done this especially, Hawaiian men wore something called a malo, which is the same as a breechclout, similar to what you see sometimes in American Indians wearing this short thing, diaper-like thing, okay? And but in Hawaii, you could tell the difference between someone and know a lot about them by the nature of the cloth. Now, it was a cloth made from the bark of trees, paper bark. So it was really a form of paper, but there was the fine stuff, and then there was the stuff that the commoners wore. And the fine stuff made from the wake plant. And he was wearing a very fine malo. So they automatically assumed it wasn't polite in those days to ask a person, what their birthright was. They had to show that. Either they would say it when the time came, or they had to show it through their actions. Well, he looked like an ali'i, and so they treated him like an ali'i. So they said, "Aloha mai e malihini." Welcome, stranger. They said, "Are you here to challenge us at surfing?" And he laughed and he said, "No." He said, "I'm here to learn surfing." He says, he wasn't ashamed. This is a wonderful sign of someone who has really a great deal of self-confidence. Not a fake confidence, but so confident that they don't mind being teased and they don't mind laughing with people about themselves. Well, that's what he was like. So he said, where I come from, he said, they have no beaches. And so everybody assumed that it was from a part of the island where they had cliffs, like we have down in Puna. So anyway, suddenly they turned around, somebody shouted, and then the rest of them all turned around and shouted as somebody came in from the surfing. And he says, "Why are you shouting?" She says, that's our young chiefess. She surfs like a goddess. And when someone surfs that well, we all shout our praise. And as she landed on the shore, and whoa, sure enough, she looked like a goddess to Hiko. Beautiful girl. But he didn't see her very long because she came on the shore, ran into a hut that was a temporary hut that was on the beach to change her clothes. Not to change her clothes, to put on her clothes. Because this clothing that they had was made from paper, even though it was finely pounded and good, it didn't last very long in the water. So even in the days of the ancient times and all the way on up into the times at the beginning of the monarchy, people would always take off their clothes to go swimming. And nothing was thought of that. However, as soon as you were out of the water, the polite thing to do was to put something on. But while you were swimming, fine, that was the way you did it, or you wouldn't have any clothes when you get out of the water. So that's what she did. When she came out finally, she was wearing a beautiful pa'u, which was, they not only had this cloth made from the paper bark, but they also had all kinds of dyes. And one of the colors that was restricted to the ali'i was red. And so she had a red pa'u, a red skirt, and she was wearing red blossoms inlays, several of them around her neck. And so she comes up, and as they come up, Hiku's thinking, this woman is more graceful than the tree ferns of the forest, more lovely than the full moon on the night of Hoku. And when she spoke, her voice was sweeter than the song of the apapane, which is a forest bird, you guess, okay? Aloha mai e malihini, Hawaii ko'uinoa, she said, which means, greetings, stranger, what's your name? The stranger was so handsome that the girl, whose name was Kavelo, was surprised that she could even speak. So Hiko said, "Oh, Hiko, ko'uinoa." Oi, my name is Hiku. What's yours? And the girl was so beautiful that he was surprised he could even speak. O Kawelu Ko'uinoa, she said, my name is Kawelu. Have you come to compete in a surfing contest? She hoped so, because then they could surf together. And he said, no, I came to learn how to surf. There are no beaches where I come from. Can you teach me? He hoped so, because then they could surf together. Okay? So that was even better, thought Kawelu. Okay, I'll be glad to, she said. Let's begin now. So she picks up her board, borrows a board from a friend to give to him, and they run down to the beach. So he followed, and he went into the water. He tried to imitate her and the other people that he saw. And as long as he lay flat on the board, one of the sports that he used to do in the mountain was holua, which is both the name of the sport and also the name of a sled. Hawaiians had a very, very narrow sled, looked very much like our snow sleds, okay, with runners, more like a toboggan, but very small, very narrow. And they would find a hill in the uplands, and they would cut grass, this long grass that they used for thatching the houses, and they would lay it down and lay a track on top of the lava. And then they would race, because he didn't have anybody to race with, but nevertheless they would jump on the sled and race down the hill. And they would go really, really fast, because these were highly polished runners that they had on the board, on the sled. And it was very dangerous, and so it took an awful lot of skill. Even with the grass, you could always hit a rock. But they did really well. And he did well too. So he thought that surfing was very much like sledding as long as he was lying down. And so he did good. And didn't get much praise because he wasn't really standing up. Now that was another matter. That was trickier. So he tried to surf standing up, and fell off and tried and fell off and tried and fell off. And he laughed with everybody else. There was nothing bad about that. But then he thought hard. He says, okay, wait a second. What is this like that I know? And he thought and thought, and he says, it's a lot like running across a branch in the wind. So maybe I can think of it that way. So he tried that, and it worked. And he found that he was able to keep his balance when he thought of what he did when the branch was waving in the wind and he ran across it. And so he then began to surf. In a very short time, he was surfing so well that he got shouts of praise. So that was a lot of fun. Next thing he wanted to try was diving. Now, Hawaiian diving, when we think of diving, we think of plunging in head first. That wasn't the idea. They did it as a sport, as a game, but they did it differently. What their idea was you jump off a high rock, feet first. And the object was to make as little a splash as possible. So that was the skill. And the most fantastic expert that there are legends about were the ones who could dive into the water that way and not make any splash at all. So anyway, he tried it a few times. And of course he had big splashes and he looked funny when he was jumping, and so everybody laughed, and he laughed too. Same kind of thing, no problem before. But then he thought about it. And I said, where had he done anything like this before? He said, well, he had never dived into water, but he had dived into the brush when he was tracking a wild pig, with making very little noise. And he thought about how they did that. Perhaps what he did would work there. It had to do with, moving your body in certain ways, it had relaxing muscles at the right time, and thinking about melting into the brush. So he tried the same thing. And it worked. Pretty soon he was diving, not absolutely like the very best of them, but among the good ones. And he started to get some praise for his diving, which of course pleased him very much. Now, the short of it is that in the following days, Hiku and Kawelu spent a lot of time together surfing and diving and playing and just having such a good time that they fell in love and wanted to get married. Now, when they wanted to get married, they had to go to her father, the chief, and the father demanded to know how Hiku could prove his lineage. Well, so this is where he went and got the bundle that he'd hid and brought it back and opened it up and showed the tokens. Now, we don't know in this story what the tokens were, but some of the typical things might be a weapon, a hand weapon, might be a malo, might be a breechclout that was obviously belonged to a chief, might be a lei, especially one of the chiefly leis, which looks like a fish hook, a wide, broad fish hook. Maybe you've seen some of those. It's actually a human tongue, is what it represents, and originally hung on human hair. And what it symbolized was the power of words, either because you could speak very well or because you had such authority. Sometimes a token like that would be left as well. Anyway, something would be obviously belonged to a chief. So the chief wasn't fully convinced because, you know, it's always possible for someone to find this. It's always possible for someone to steal it. So he brought in his kahuna to take a good look at Hiku's spirit. And the kahuna did that and pronounced him a true ali'i. So then the chief gave his permission and Hiku and Kawelu were married. And they spent many months together, very happy, you know, just enjoying life down on the beach. Till one day, Hiku happened to get up and for some reason looked up toward the heights, saw the mists swirling around the top of Hualalai volcano, and had this sudden longing to walk in the cool forests again, because Kona's hot, okay? But it didn't, as long as he was in love with Kawelu, he didn't mind that at all, but he did suddenly have this longing to walk up there again. So he went to Kawelu and he said, look, he says, we've been enjoying ourselves so much, I'd like you to take you to my mountain home and to see the things that I do and meet my mother and grandfather and see how I lived. And she said, he saw, she had fear in her eyes. He didn't understand until she said, no, my husband, we cannot do that. There are ghosts and spirits, evil spirits in the mountains. Everyone knows that. Now, I had started when I told you that in those days all the Hawaiians lived on the coast. It was not just because it was uncomfortable in the mountains, but most of them believed that there were evil spirits that would get you. And this is because so many people didn't know the mountains, and they could fall into a lava tube and they could get hurt in so many different ways in the forest because they didn't know it. And so it grew up that it was a dangerous place, and then it grew up that it was dangerous because of the evil spirits and all that. So she believed that, and she was very frightened. I mean, really scared when he wanted to take her back up there. So, okay, all right, he backed off. A few more months. He'd talk to her a little bit once in a while, and it was always absolutely no. But the longing grew stronger and stronger. So finally, he said, I've just got to go. So one night, he decided just to leave without telling her. And he was going to stay a few days and come back. So up he went, made his way all the way back up to where his mother lived, and was enjoying himself so much for a few days up there in the forest area and listening to all the sounds that he loved. And then suddenly there was another sound that he'd never heard before. It wasn't like anything else. And he said, Mother, what's that? And she said, that's the sound of wailing. Because she picked it up. She had some intuition. So she said, they are mourning Kawelu. When you left, she was heartbroken. And she thought you were gone forever. And so she went to Milu, the land of death. Well, he was upset. And he said, no, that can't be. That just cannot be. I'll go and get her and bring her back. His mother said, no one does that. No one can ever bring someone back from the land of death. And he said, I will. I will. His mother said, well, I don't know where the entrance to Milo is, but your grandfather does. Maybe he can help you. So Hiku went off to his grandfather, and he asked about Milu and asked if his grandfather could help him or tell him how he could bring Kawelu back. And he said, I can show you where it is, the entrance, but I don't know how to get her back. So then Hiko sat down and went into a form of meditation called Nalu, which is a quiet meditation, and he asked for his own guardian spirit, his aumakua, to give him some inspiration. And so he's sitting there, wondering, just open-minded about what's possible. Suddenly an image of a swing came to his mind. And he said, yes, that will work. Now, I got to explain what a Hawaiian swing was like. Very simple kind of thing. It's seen in some other parts of the world, but basically it's a long rope tied around the middle of a stick. And so you sit with your legs, with the rope between you and your legs over the stick, and that's how they would swing. So, what they usually used for a swing in Hawaii in those days were the vines for the rope. They used the vines of a morning glory, a Hawaiian type morning glory, and which are very, very tough, and they could even be woven into rope. So he told his grandfather to get ready to leave, and he went off in the woods and in the clearings, and he gathered up just as much of it's called kawali, the kawali vines that he could, and he wove them into the longest rope he could think of, and he tied it around the middle of a little bigger than this, maybe about this big, a branch of the ohia tree, which is a very hard wood, and he wrapped that all around in a bundle and came to his grandfather, and he said, let's go. Well, the entrance was way over in Waipio Valley, on the other side of the island. So he followed his grandfather all the way over there. And when they got there, he came to this lava tube cave, and he brought him inside. And there in the cave was this black pit. And his grandfather said, that's the entrance to Milu. And Hiko says, okay. Now his grandfather was very old, but also very strong. So he said to his grandfather, you let me down, you take the rope, you let me down into the pit. And when I shake the rope 3 times, you pull me up. His grandfather said, okay. He said, however, if I'm not back in a night and a day, then you know I'm going to be as dead as Kawelu. Because it was dangerous down there. Living people to go into the realm of the dead, the spirits of the dead in Hawaiian legends were very jealous of the living. And so they would attack him if anyone ever went down there. It was very dangerous to do. So just before he went down, he covered himself in the bad-smelling oil of rotten kukui nuts, because the dead smell bad. Okay? He didn't want them to be able to smell him as a living person. And he covered himself with dirt. Okay? And then he got on the swing, and his grandfather let him down. Down and down and way, way down, and it was black and black. And just about the time that Hiku was thinking, I don't think I'm ever going to make it, suddenly it started getting just a little lighter. Now, Hawaiians had different concepts of the afterworld, and this is one of them. That it was a place very much like the Greek Hades, which was dim and uninteresting, and it was a very dim light. In fact, one of the versions said all they had to eat were moths. I think I remember that from the Greek too, so I don't know whether they borrowed that part. But anyway, he found this area, and it was very much like this world, only gray, almost like black and white. So he was careful and looked around, made sure nobody was there to see what he was doing, and he kept going down and down until he got almost to the ground. And then he pushed himself off from a rock and began swinging. And he chanted. I'll get to it. And he said, I have a swing. Now, I'm not going to chant this in Hawaiian, but he said, I have a swing, as he pushed off the rock. And you don't. And he swung. And he continued to go higher. Swinging is easy, he said. For me, not for you. And that was the chant. Well, that's about guaranteed to bring some people around. And Hawaiians, many of them loving a challenge even when they were dead. And so the spirits of the dead came up to him shouting, let me swing, let me swing, let me swing. And he stopped and got off and let each one of them swing in turn, and everybody's having a gay old time. Then he heard the voice that he was waiting for. You see, he had to do something to attract her because Milu's huge. And he couldn't spend all his time going searching for her. He would end up living there. So this was to attract the spirits. And he heard her voice saying, let me swing. But she was a spirit now, and she didn't recognize him. But she came up and she wanted to swing. He said, would you like to go high? And she said, yes. He said, okay, well then you have to sit on my lap because it's dangerous. So he got on the swing, put her on his lap, and began pushing off. And as they swung higher and higher, the other spirits were shouting praise, just like they did in real life. And he got higher, and then at the one high height, he shook the rope 3 times, and his grandfather started pulling him up. And the people down below were shouting until they realized that they weren't coming down as far. They were actually going up to the upper world. And then they got angry and shouted in anger, but they were all helpless. There was nothing they could do about it. So he's going up and up and up to the top of the hole. And near the top, Kawelu starts struggling like she's afraid of the light and afraid of life. And he held on to her really, really tight until the grandfather pulled him up out of the hole. And then she came back to life and recognized her husband and gave him a big hug and said, oh, my husband, that was such a terrible time. That was so awful when you left me. That was so awful when I wanted to come to you and was too afraid. That was so terrible when I died. So terrible when, he said, stop. Hush, my love. Hiko took his beautiful wife into his arms. It's only a bad memory. And it's pau, which in Hawaiian means something totally over and done with. We're both alive now, he said. We can enjoy the pleasures of forest and shores now. Let's love and live now. And so they did. Pipi holo, keka'au. And so the story goes. All right. Now, we're going to move from this into our topic of the day, which is about how to heal bad memories. Okay. There was an American philosopher. Some of you may have heard of him. His name is Alexander Korzybski. And he made a very interesting statement. He said, a map is not the territory. And what he meant by that is a map is only a symbol of experience, not the experience itself. It's useful as a map only to the degree that it's an accurate representation of the terrain that it represents. Maps also, of course, they can be used for planning. They can use for, they're a lot of fun if you're reading a fictional story like Sword and Sorcery or science fiction. They make a map of the world that somebody invented. Okay? But it's only a symbol. Now, in exactly the same way, a memory, any kind of memory, is not the experience it represents. It's only a symbol of that experience. When we call it's only useful, again, even memories have uses, but the memory is only useful to the degree it can provide some sort of physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual benefit. What we call a bad memory is only a symbol that represents some more or less unpleasant experience. It's not the experience itself. Now, believing that it is the experience is what causes people the most problems when they have to deal with bad memories. Because people make an identification, they bring back the memory, and they keep thinking that that's real, that's alive, that's here, that's now, that's awful. And it's only a symbol. Memories, some part of us, well, here's how they happen. We don't know. Some part of us creates memories. Or we can say it differently. Some part of us records experiences. Right? There are theories, but nobody knows how that's done. We do know that it is done, because sometimes spontaneously and sometimes on purpose, we can call up a memory of an event. But memories, like it as experiences, okay? Memories are as records of experiences, rather. They're not like books in the library, okay, that don't change. They're not static. Memories are more like movies, or videos, or audio recordings that can deteriorate, be enhanced, played louder or softer, be rearranged, edited, have special effects added, reissued in new versions, and apparently even be deleted. Okay? See, so memories are much more, the word we use is dynamic. They're not static. Memories, even bad ones, can do what we call change on their own. That just means we don't know how it happens. But over the years, we can have different feelings and even different thoughts, even about a bad memory. Bad memories in particular, and talking about change, is not always for the better. They can get worse. They can have increasingly bad effects on our lives. Or they can fade away to the point where we can't even remember them. Now, this brings us to our first possible technique for dealing with bad memories. What I'm going to say may be too wild for most people, but it's very powerful and very effective. So I'm going to do the toughest one first. If a memory recording can change itself without your conscious intention, it can also be changed with your conscious intention. So the technique is to consciously re-edit the memory. Change the story. Imagine vividly that it happened differently. Invent something that makes the memory not so bad, or even makes it good. You have the power to do that. This bothers some people. And the reason it bothers them is that they are making identification between the recording and the experience. It's almost like, and you can understand how when people have feelings, it's almost like feeling you're hurting somebody if you tear their photograph. Okay? A photograph is just a recorded image of that person at a particular moment in time that doesn't even exist anymore. We, out of respect, out of good feelings, things like that, we often don't do that, unless we get really angry. Right? But if we have a bad photograph, we don't have any problem with tearing it up, throwing it away. It's nothing but a piece of paper recording something. It's not the thing itself. But that's why people have trouble with this idea, with this technique. You're not trying to change history if you do this. You can't do that from where you are right now. You're just changing your memory about it. And when you're able to do this successfully, it's no longer a bad memory. But, like I said, maybe you like the idea, and maybe this idea is not for you. But I just wanted to put it out there as one possibility. So let's look at another approach. Another approach is to change the energy of the memory. And when I say energy, I mean primarily the environmental energy, physical energy, emotional energy that was recorded when the event took place. Because all that's recorded too. Also any energy that you added to it since then. If you have an energetic reaction to a particular bad memory, like chills, or nausea, or anger, or fear, or all four, it's because those feelings are part of the memory recording. In addition, when you recall the memory, If you try to repress the chills, okay, clamp down on the nausea, get angry at the anger, get afraid of the fear, what you're doing is adding more energy to the memory. That makes it easier to recall, makes the effects more severe each time you do recall it. See, memories are recalled consciously or not, they are, according to the intensity of the energy recorded in the memory. Let me put it better. According to the intensity of your physical and emotional reactions at the time of the event. Those are the memories that are quickest to call up, easiest to call up. There's an experiment you can try. You can try it now if you want to, but it shows you what I mean. If you think of a party that you went to, now let's assume this is a good memory. You think of a party that you went to. Almost never is the first thing you think of the beginning of the party. It's usually somebody singing or dancing or movement or hugging or something that produced a reaction. That's what you remember first. The next thing you remember, if you really focus on it, will be the one with the next amount of energy, and so on, till, with your conscious mind, you can take all these memories and arrange them according to the time, from beginning to end. But the first memory will be the one that you had the strongest reaction to. That's how memories work. Good memories or bad memories. Yeah? You can experiment with that sometime. The smaller the reaction, the harder it is to recall the memory. This is why for most people, lunch 2 weeks ago Tuesday is virtually a non-event. Okay? So when I say change the energy of the memory, what I really mean is to change your reaction to the memory. This is not only powerfully effective, a lot more acceptable to most people once they've learned it. So let me share what that's like. Either sitting or standing, this is usually better than lying down, but either sitting or standing, recall a memory. We're talking about a bad memory. Recall the memory, feel the place in your body that reacts, or that where it affects you the most. And put all of your attention on relaxing that part of the body. Okay? Relax it any way you can. When that part of your body feels better, start over. Recall the memory, feel whether it's the same part of your body or a different part that reacts. Relax that. And you keep doing this until you're able, if you really want to do the whole thing, until you're able to remember the event with no bad reaction. Okay? Where you feel calm about it. I mean, it's possible to tighten up all your muscles so you feel nothing, but that's not what we want. Because the moment you relax those muscles, that bad memory, emotions are going to come roaring back again. No, you want to be able to remember it and feel relaxed. And you can do this with this technique by just going over and over. And it doesn't take very long, surprisingly short time. You can completely change what effect a bad memory has on you. Okay? Now, it's important again, with this technique, you're not trying to change the memory. The first technique, you were trying to change the memory. With this technique, you're not trying to change the memory. All you're doing is changing your body's reactions to the memory. Okay? That's the real problem in the first place. Let's take a cue from the story now. The past is pow, over and done with. You're living now, you're not living in the past. When we say someone is living in the past, what we really mean is they're filling their minds right now with memories of the past. They're still living in the present. You don't disappear when you start thinking of the past. Okay? You can moan and groan and fill your mind with all memories of the past and ignore what's going on around you. Some people do that. Very unpleasant. Doesn't help solve a thing. Okay? Yes, it increases unhappiness. The final technique for this session, then, is to fill your mind with awareness of the beauty and the goodness in the present. Sure, there are bad things happening all over. But if you're willing to open your mind and open your heart, you'll find that there's a lot more good things happening, a lot more good being done, and a lot more good things that you can do. When the good things of the world that are happening right now are more important to you than the bad things that are happening and that already have happened, you're on your way to a good healing of mind, body, and spirit. So these are some things to think about, some things to try if you want to. Meanwhile, ku'uwelu, hang loose. Yes?
So how would you go about improving the intensity or energy of a good memory?
The way you do that is to bring it up, and there's two things you can do. One is to get excited about it. Sometimes bring up the good memory while you're dancing. Or bring up the good memory, and if you know how to do it, just kind of jump up and down and get, yes, that happened, that was wonderful. That will increase the energy. Those two things. Play some exciting music while you are remembering. That's the environmental energy that will increase it. Okay? The other thing you can do is enhance the memory. So you remember the good event, and let's just pretend, let's say it was a party. Okay? Well, make the party bigger. Have more people there. Bring some famous people in. Okay? Dress up the place even better than it was. Those are all things that will add to it. These things help make the memory even more important because of the level of energy and beauty and reaction. And so they are wonderful for being able to recall when you're really down and out. What do I do now? You remember the memory and you start to get your energy back. Okay? All right. Yes?
In the same way. So a lot of times people have a bad memory associated with something that happened, whether we say they were driving and they had a car accident.
Yes.
They were surfing and they hit the reef. But if that association becomes heightened, the way you explained it, it becomes such a bad memory that it causes someone to feel fear, not just in doing it, but to be panicked at the thought of doing this action.
Yes. Right.
Whether it's flying a plane, someone they know died in a plane accident. How can you kind of help someone else? I mean, it can work for you as well, but how would you help someone to kind of reason with themselves that maybe this isn't going to happen every time?
I would say it needs more than reason because you're dealing with body reactions, not logic. That's why just reasoning very seldom works. If you use something like the one I mentioned, if they're able to call it up and feel where they feel the fear or the panic or whatever, if they can, and maybe you can help them through that, and then relax that. Another thing is the information in that blue booklet. If you don't have it, please pick one up, because that's a stronger technique for being able to relieve these problems of memory and emotion. Okay? And so what you do is you reduce the intensity of the feeling. And when you reduce that enough, I'll just give you one small example. We had a class where I was teaching that technique, and a woman had almost a panic fear of heights. It was so bad that we had a 2-foot stage, and she could not go to the edge of that. That's how bad it was. I used the technique with her, taught her the technique. It's one you do yourself. I taught her the technique that's in the blue booklet called Dynamind. And after about, we call it a round, there's something where you say something and you touch parts of your body and you breathe. And after about 3 rounds, she felt no more fear. She walked up to the edge and jumped off, And I said, well, let's have a real test. Why don't you go up in the balcony, we had a balcony in the theater, and just walk over toward the edge of the railing and see how you feel. She runs upstairs, runs down the aisle, gets over to the railing, and starts to climb over. I had to stop her. Okay? I don't know whether she was going to go down and hang or what, but that fear was totally gone. See? So sometimes you get that dramatic an effect, but regardless, it will change the fear because it's changing your body reaction. Sometimes you have to do something step by step. Think of a car. Think of being in a car. Look at a car. Walk toward a car. Sometimes you have to do it like that, but it will clear it out.